Meverach is kind enough to let us use his church quite often, and I appreciate his help on that end. Also, Elizabeth Spark and David Kyle are hosting tonight from the church itself, from the Spiritual Center. And what else? We have many sponsors of this event. I want to thank United for Justice with Peace and the Social Action Committee, the First UU, Green Rainbow, Common Street Spiritual Center, WILF, Venezuela Solidarity Committee, Mass Peace Action, Witness for Peace, United National Anti-War Coalition, Boston West, Metro West, Boston DSA. We are here tonight. Apparently, we want to learn more about Venezuela. It sounds like somebody said, like a movie we've seen before when it comes to our interference in South America and Central America. We have two people who are familiar with Venezuela. Bauman Azad was there late March, early April. I believe you were there last in November of 18. Okay, great. And I have heard them speak, and it's amazing what we don't know. And it's amazing how much you can learn when you do hear from people who know the situation. So I think most of you have seen the brochure. I won't read their biographies, but they're well qualified to speak on the issue. And because of the delay, I think we should get going. So please welcome Jose will speak first, and then Bauman Azad. So please welcome Jose Alaman. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here. What to do on a Saturday evening? You would say that perhaps meeting in a church, in a spiritual center, is not the most fashionable thing to do, and yet we are here because we have an interest in understanding better the world around us and what our authorities do on our behalf. I am Jose Aleman. I am a high school teacher. I teach at Westford, north of here. I am from El Salvador. And last November, I was in Venezuela for the first time. I have a very personal connection with Venezuela because during the war, the civil war in El Salvador back in the 80s and 90s, you may remember, the US was heavily involved in that conflict. Two Venezuelans whom I came to meet when I was working with refugees in the border with Honduras were fighting as combatants for the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. Julio Cesar Guzman and his son, Julio Cesar Guzman Navas. Both of them fought in El Salvador and died in El Salvador. And I always wanted to go to Venezuela, and I had plenty of opportunities. I was also a consul general for El Salvador since 2010 for New England. And I had invitations, I had opportunities, the times were better in Venezuela, and yet I had my obligations here, and I said, thank you, but maybe later. I wouldn't choose a better time to go because Venezuela is not in the best of the times, and because the critical visits to Venezuela now serve to educate us more about what is really happening there. So my trip, which was sponsored by the Boston Venezuela Solidarity Committee, was formed by three people. One from El Salvador, a woman, Vilma Calderon, and Luis Sanchez, originally from Colombia. Both of them are US citizens now. And initially, the delegation was 8 people. What happened to the other 5? I wouldn't say they got scared. I will simply say that they thought it over and decided not to go. We went, and what we found was certainly challenging because it destroys some of our perceptions, some of our notions, some of our understanding of how Venezuela works on a daily basis. What I'm going to show you now is a slideshow. I would have rather presented you a web page that also has audios, interviews, and videos as opposed to pictures. But I hope through the pictures, you can capture the people we met, the places we visited, as ways to grasp not the opinions of politicians or leaders of the country. I think Baman will do that. He just recently came back, so he has very fresh images and a testimony to give. I will focus on images. Why? I believe that images also educate and tell us in full color how Venezuela looks in November. So this is a mural 2 blocks away from the hotel, a very modest hotel we were hosted at. Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro to the left. This mural was, they told me, at the high point of the relationship between Cuba and Venezuela, and when Venezuela was rich in revenues from the oil. It's not the case now. Our first encounters were with old people. Downtown Caracas, old people who were in literacy courses, learning how to read and write. Some of them were not born in Venezuela. They were from Peru, they were from Colombia, and they made Venezuela their second home. I'm talking about a woman who moved 10 years ago from Colombia, fleeing the war in Colombia. Now she's learning how to read and write in Venezuela. Mission Robinson is the alternative of education for adults. Is using a method called Yo Si Puedo, which has been tested by Cubans, developed by them about 20 years ago, has been used in Argentina, in Venezuela. Remember, in 2003, Venezuela was declared by the UNESCO free of illiteracy. It has been tested also in El Salvador, in Haiti, and in other countries in Africa. So that's also part of the collaboration between Cuba and Venezuela. Educators, pedagogy, trainers to read, to teach how to read and write. But Mission Robinson also developed Mission Vargas and Mission Sucre, which is not just teaching adults how to read and write, but also taking them to the formal school for them to get the equivalent of a GED. And now Mission Sucre, taking them, if they want, to public universities, one of the 60 universities that the Bolivarian Revolution has built in the last 20 years to get a university degree. So that's investing in adults, something we don't see in many places, certainly not in El Salvador. We happened to be in Caracas by the time of an international book fair, and although I cannot show you videos, you can see through the pictures that there were stands representing different countries. Turkey was the featured country at that particular book fair. It lasted 8 days from a weekend to weekend. Books were fairly available in the editorials of Venezuela were given books for free. In fact, they shared with us a bunch of them and we brought them. I don't have them here with me, but we got some as gifts. Venezuelan editorials. We also went to learn a new way of Venezuela to take care of the blockade or the inability that now Venezuela has to use the US dollar. The US dollar is forbidden for Venezuelan authorities to use as a way to buy, as a way to conduct international business. So el petro is cryptocurrency that the day that Venezuela announced it back in August last year, immediately the US Treasury announced that any citizen and corporation and company using the cryptocurrency, El Petro, would face penalties and consequences. So you are not allowed as US citizen to use Petro, the cryptocurrency backed by oil reserves, by gold reserves of the Venezuelan government. You cannot use it, you cannot purchase it, you cannot use it as means of payment. In one word, the US essentially prevented Venezuela from finding its own way of paying for their purchases at the international market. And that was back in August last year. This is, to me, the most outstanding physical investment that I could report to you that I saw. This is called Fuerte Tiuna, and it's part of the Gran Misión Vivienda that started in 2014. And in less than 10 years, in less than 7 years, they have built 2.4 million housing units. Just in this neighborhood, they have 5,000 apartments. And this is an agreement with the Chinese government, with the Belarusian government, and Turkish and Brazilian, back in the days of Brazil having a friendlier relationship with Venezuela. 5,000 units. And the units have daycare centers, they have restaurants, they have clinics, they have museums, they have senior centers for people to gather. They have multi-purpose rooms. Imagine 5,000 units being built with all those facilities, parking spaces, bus routes, bus stops, markets available to take care, essentially, of a new city being developed right outside of Caracas. I haven't seen that, not even in Cuba, and I've been in Cuba several times. This was impressive. I am an educator. I am a father of 2 kids. My son is back there. He's 15 years old. He was in Cuba with me 2 years ago. And we were impressed by the Cuban advancement in education. But what I saw here in Venezuela, and this was not a planned concert for us, we simply were invited to a concert that was going on in the nearby neighborhood. And the kids you see there, the youngest was 4.5 years old, were just giving a concert, a gala to the parents. There were maybe 35 kids total, and there were maybe 50, 60 parents from the neighborhood. We came and we were delighted by how an after-school program would develop such discipline and passion for music. Let's remember that Venezuela has the Sistema, so-called. And Gustavo Dudamel, who was supposed to be here about 3 weeks ago in conducting the Boston Symphony Orchestra, couldn't do it because apparently he had a hand problem. I am sure that it's more than a hand problem. And perhaps there were disagreements between the US and Gustavo Dudamel, who happens to be Venezuelan. And he is the voice of the Sistema, which for 15 years or so has been leading youth all over the world, presenting a new way of teaching music, not to the elites, not to the gifted and talented, to neighborhood kids after school. Universal access to music after school. Those are some of the instruments. That's where the revenues from the oil has been. Housing, education, literacy, universities, instruments for our kids. And this is just a call center that takes care of your prescription drugs. There has been a lot of speculation and shortages of medicine, and a lot has to do with business people, business owners of pharmacies, just holding on medicines and supplies, speculating with the price. Why? Because the hyperinflation that Venezuela does have creates opportunities. If you wait one day, if you wait one weekend, you can increase the value of the insulin. You name the drug, you name the product, and private pharmacies can simply hike the price and customers have to buy. So Venezuela insisted on, you know what, now as a country, we're going to purchase medicines, something that is very popular, gained some support back in the years, about 3 years ago, when somebody said here in the United States, why don't we purchase bulk from Canada or other places and negotiate a better price for all the drugs and make them available? That's what Venezuela is doing. Now Venezuela purchases the medicines. You call a hotline number, an 800 number or a 0 number, and you request a supply of medicine. This is not to say that Venezuela has all the medicines available. That's not the case. So they have shortages. They have problems supplying their patients with the medicines that they need, with the drugs they need, because it happens that about 80% or so of the products have either European or US and Canada patents. And remember, it's forbidden to trade with Venezuela and with Venezuela, the Venezuelan government. Speaking of technology, no Apple computers, no Microsoft licenses. Venezuela decided about 15 years ago or more to be on a free software. And they have developed their own with Chinese support in this case. And I toured the factory and the laboratories where they develop their software, where they install their software, where they ensemble, they put together the tablets and the computers. More than 1 million computers have been distributed, not among the ones who can buy it, but kids, elementary school kids. And I visited a home, and the middle picture is the one. 2 kids were playing with a tablet and with a laptop that was ensembled, put together in Venezuela with free software. No Windows licenses necessary. They also put together the cell phones. iPhone, and I have one, only has 2 stores in the whole country of Venezuela. There are 3 cell phone companies, or one of them, 2 of them are private, one of them is owned by the state. We visited also the National Electoral Council, but I'm sure that Baman will talk more about that, so I will skip that part. It's a crucial one, though. And then we went to the neighborhoods, and we saw a mayor of a tiny town being with the people, celebrating with the people. This is, remember, November last year. I don't see the big crisis. I didn't witness that, but maybe things have changed. But I saw a mayor of a town exchanging with the people, bringing medical services to the people, being on a weekend with kids, engaging with the kids, with the community. To me, that's a leader. That's a leader. No heavy armor vehicles, just a human being playing in a town that he has He's in charge of governing and leading. This is the clinic services to the people. We interview a Cuban doctor, a woman who was helping in a neighborhood, not poor neighborhood, but a popular neighborhood, a working class neighborhood. Where are the Venezuelan doctors? And they explained to me they are medical school. It takes 5-7 years to graduate doctors. They had difficulties at the beginning, having Venezuelan doctors committed to work in all the villages, in all the neighborhoods, in the new neighborhoods developed by the Bolivarian Revolution. So they made an agreement with Cuba to exchange, to trade oil for doctors, educators, and so on. That was a good example. And to me, was working. The Boston Venezuela Solidarity Committee has, since 3 years ago, a program to develop a people-to-people exchange, which means we are in communication with communities of farmers in Barquisimeto, in Venezuela. And that a particular group of farmers were instrumental in developing the seeds law of Venezuela. No Cargill, no Monsanto, no transgenic seeds, since the Venezuelan Revolution set the limits for corporations and for revenues and ways of selling their products. So now there is a need, however, for farmers to produce their own basic products, and that takes time. They have to develop their heirloom seeds. That takes time. So we are in an exchange with them. We visited them in November, and they are now in communication with us, letting us know what kind of seeds they want, what kind of support they want. And to us, that is a people-to-people exchange. We were able, through that exchange and those visits, to learn what the feelings of the people were toward the revolution, toward the government, toward the US. And to me, that was priceless. This is not the opinion of a mayor, not the opinion of a politician, but the people. And finally, we were in Caracas. This is Caracas, I must admit. It was not the wealthy neighborhood. This is the equivalent of CBS. The popular neighborhood, the equivalent here of, I would say, South Boston, the equivalent of South Boston. I see products, I didn't see shortages. Again, that was November. Neighbors and corners defending unarmed the neighborhood. Not because there is no police, simply because they are committed. They have free time, and they are committed with defending what they describe as the revolution that made them visible. A bakery next door to our hotel. ISO bread, all the basic necessities were there. Papayas and bananas saying, yes, there are. Fruit stands, I would say well supplied. The equivalent of a corner store, yes. Supplies were not in shortage in Caracas when I was there in November. This is my presentation. Again, I didn't bring the voices of the people we met with, but I will leave the link so that you can just visit and hear the people. Maybe because it's Spanish, you won't be able to understand every single word, but you could see whom they are. And I will, before Baman comes, I will ask you to pay attention to one thing as a clue that allowed me a lot. It helped me a lot to understand Venezuela. When you see darker people, you will see people for whom the revolution has invested the most. When you see light-skinned people, you will see people who are complaining because before they had access to the oil revenues for themselves, for their neighborhoods, for their neighbors, for their kids who sometimes would be sent to come to Harvard, to Boston, to study at Harvard. Those days are over. And when you used to have those opportunities, and since, let's say, 2003, things changed, you certainly have reasons to complain. And you have reasons, powerful reasons to say that that revolution is a failure. Yes, it's a failure for them. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Hello, everyone. I'm Bahman Azad, Organizational Secretary of the U.S. Peace Council. We had a delegation of various leaders of different peace organizations, national peace organizations that went to Venezuela from March 10th to 15th. Of course, this was our scheduled time. The arrivals were disrupted by two factors. One, American Airlines on that day actually canceled all flights to Caracas. Some of our delegate members were on American flights, and when they got to Miami, they realized that they cannot fly to Caracas. So they came the first leg of the trip and they were stuck there. So that was one. The second was on the return, which again, because of the cancellation of American Airlines and other flights, the rest of the people whose flights were canceled moved to the only airline, Copa, that was available at the time. And so it was a packed schedule for all airlines. And a lot of people had to reschedule their flights, and some of our delegate members ended up staying just by themselves there for a week longer until they could catch a flight. So, but the actual delegation period was from 10th to 15th of March. The reason we had this delegation is also similar to what we had in 2016 when the all-out attack on the Syrian government started by the United States. And we thought we should do something about it, bring it to the attention of the people. And that is why we try to approach other peace organizations, many other parts of the movement, to see if we can create a front or a group or a coalition to oppose the invasion or attack on Syria. Some organizations joined us, some of them refused, a good portion of them refused, arguing that, well, both sides are bad. Assad is bad, US government is bad, we don't want to take sides, so we sit on the fence. That was the solution. So we decided that we should do something more drastic to get these people to move. So we put together a delegation of various leaders of the peace movement. It was a smaller delegation than what we had in Venezuela. And they went to Syria and visited all aspects or sectors of Syrian society, the labor movement, the civil society, the parties, the parliament, foreign ministry, and also at the end they met with President Assad for 2 hours and came back, and we had two press conferences at the United Nations. It was broadcast internationally and made a huge difference. And in fact, we were of course attacked afterwards seriously by various people. They called us the Communist Front. They said we drank Assad's Kool-Aid. They said we were Putinized, all kinds of things. But ultimately, we pushed them back by creating the Hands Off Syria coalition, the same way as now there's Hands Off Venezuela. Not that we created that one, but it was a collective effort. And so when the day that United States recognized Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela illegally, we thought there should be something done. I mean, very quickly, because I'll explain later why there was a drastic, need for a drastic action. But for now, I'm just saying that we immediately tried to contact various peace movement organizations and their leaders and ask them if they would be willing to be part of a U.S. Peace Council delegation to Venezuela. Of course, this was coordinated with the Committee in Solidarity for International Solidarity in COSI in Venezuela, which is a very active organization there. And through them, it was coordinated with the Venezuelan government because we were requesting an official visit by the peace movement of the United States, and they welcomed it. So we had about, originally we had 15 delegation members. That was our plan. 3 of them couldn't go. One because of medical emergency on the same day of his flight. Mark Burton, member of Executive Committee of the U.S. Peace Council and also on the International Committee of the National Lawyers Guild. He had a medical emergency. He had to cancel the same day of his flight. 2 of other delegate members were leaders of trade unions. One president of United Electrical Workers Union, and the other one of the leaders of the National Nurses Union. And they had the strikes on their hand. I mean, president of the United Electrical Workers told us that they were planning, there was going to be a strike in Pittsburgh against General Electric, and so they had to stay with the strike. So that's why they canceled. So 12 members of the 15 that we had planned went. I would like to go over them, the list quickly so that you know who was involved. That was the highest ever peace movement delegation that was sent in solidarity to any country. And it was in a sense an official visit. We had Ajay Mubaraka, vice presidential candidate of Green Party in 2016, also the national coordinator or organizer of the Black Alliance for Peace. We had Jerry Condon, president of Veterans for Peace. Darian DeLue, president of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Miguel Figueroa, president of the Canadian Peace Congress. Sarah Flounders, co-director of International Action Center. Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeese, Popular Resistance co-directors. Joe Lombardo, co-coordinator of UNAC. Daniel Shea from Veterans for Peace. We had Eva Bartlett on our delegation, the independent reporter that has done a great job on Syria, very brave woman. And Sarah Martin, a member of Leadership of Women Against Military Madness. So this delegation went to Caracas on March 10th. I go quickly over the meetings that we had, just list them and then go to some of the important topics that I think we found out, the facts we have found out and the issues that we discussed with them. The first meeting we had was with the Venezuelan foreign minister at the foreign ministry for about 2 hours in the morning of the first day we arrived, during which he explained what is going on, what the United States is doing around the world against Venezuela politically. We had a meeting with government economists who explained to us in the afternoon about the impact of sanctions, what those American illegal sanctions are doing to the Venezuelan people and the Venezuelan economy. We had a meeting with the president of the National Human Rights Council of Venezuela, which explained to us how they are trying to defend human rights and how the United States is violating every aspect of human rights of Venezuelan people through sanctions and threats of war and everything else. We had a meeting with the Union of Journalists of Venezuela, who discussed with us how they are watching both sides of reporting from the Venezuelan side in terms of the reality and facts on the ground, and how the U.S. media is reporting it. And they had created a website to talk about discrepancies and lies that are going on in the United States about Venezuela. We had a meeting with health sector officials, Ministry of Health. That was one of the critical meetings we had in terms of the impact of sanctions in terms of medical supplies and medicine in Venezuela. I mean, Jose pointed to it, but I will go a little bit further and elaborate in terms of numbers, which is real crisis and anti-human act that the U.S. is doing in Venezuela. We met with the Minister of Urban Agriculture, which is more or less a new ministry. She's a very young activist, actually. This is urban agriculture idea is the question of guaranteeing Venezuela's self-sufficiency in food, up to the point that sanctions were imposed. Venezuela was importing good part of its food supplies from abroad, especially United States, in exchange for sale of oil. And that was cut off. So they had to figure out a way of creating self-sufficiency. So they are moving in the direction of having every backyard, every roof, every public area, every park, turning it into agricultural production process. And that involves mobilization of the whole communities in towns and cities and everything else. And they are getting a great response. People are really committed to defending their country, not only for their food, but for their independence that they want to maintain. And the Minister of Urban Agriculture told us that they have achieved so far the ability to produce 25% of their food needs through this urban agriculture. And they are shooting for 50% right now. They are moving towards that, trying to expand it. That was another one. We met with the leaders of commune, Katia commune, which has 2 million people members. This commune consists of about 60, 70 community councils in neighborhoods that have come together and created a commune. That's the foundation of the political structure in Venezuela. Communes are the basic political cells. They run their own neighborhood. They make their own decisions about how to run their own affairs. And then the representatives gather together in a commune and get elected to leadership of the commune, and that becomes the region of the town or the city, and they manage their own affairs on a broader basis. But since the sanctions were imposed, the communes have decided to help with the Ministry of Urban Agriculture to create local production units, both in terms of raising animals and also producing crops and food and vegetables and everything in their neighborhoods. And so we had a visit of one of the largest in Caracas. And those people are really committed. They are really dedicated to fight for their country, to defend their country. And it was interesting. What was impressive for me was that they're not looking at it for producing food for themselves. They're looking at it through this, we are guaranteeing the independence of our country and protecting our economy from external intervention. And that was the approach. And the term imperialism never disappears from the mouths of these people. Everything they talk about is to protect ourselves against US imperialism. That's all there is to talk about. That's how they approach everything. Among the meetings we had, we met with the leadership of the Communist Party of Venezuela, which is in effect a coalition, in coalition with the Venezuelan government, the ruling party, and a few other left parties. Venezuelan government is actually consisting of a coalition of parties, and Communist Party is one of them. And it was a very educational meeting for us because they had a very deep analysis of the situation economically in Venezuela, the strengths of the system and the weaknesses of the system, and where are the vulnerabilities that have to be covered to protect the country against this economic onslaught, and that is going on. And finally, we had a 2-hour meeting with President Maduro, which was an eye-opening meeting for all of us in terms of understanding the nature of the Venezuelan government, its dedication to the public and the people of Venezuela. As a person, he's such an humble, down-to-earth person, you can't believe it. I'm sure you all know that he used to be a bus driver before he got involved in politics. And he actually visited Boston at the invitation of the bus drivers of Boston. And he has a photo behind the wheels of a Boston bus that one of our delegation members took to him in that meeting and gave it to him. And he was so exhausted, he was almost dancing. He said, I will have it distributed throughout Venezuela. This is my. So that was his, but he is very humble, dedicated, and committed, and honest, straightforward. He answered every question we had in the most straightforward way, didn't dodge the same way politicians do or anything. He was very clear about it. So that was the whole meeting, the range of activities that we had. But there are some of these aspects that are very critical in our mind, and we think we should really elaborate on it because we have, if we want to protect and defend not only Venezuela, but any other nation that is going through the same thing. And it's not, they're not the first one and they're not going to be the last one. The US has been involved in this process for years. In fact, since the dismantling of the Soviet Union, the first one was against Yugoslavia. Then we moved to Iraq, and then Libya, and then Syria, and one after another. And these are all, I'll explain to you at the end that these are parts of aspects of the same plan that was devised. It is nothing new, and it's not isolated case, each one of them. They are part and parcel of the one overall global project for the 21st century that the United States has developed. And they are going through all of these countries one by one. And actually, if you remember, Wesley Clark, former NATO commander, was in an interview, I think, with Amy Goodman, revealed that before even the Iraq attack happened, that we have 7 countries. They have 7 countries on the list to attack. And all of these that you're seeing one by one being targeted are on that list. I mean, we have taken Iraq's, it was after Afghanistan. They were already in Afghanistan when this was revealed. Iraq, Libya, Iran, Syria, Venezuela also afterwards, but not openly in that list, but I'll explain why it's part of that too. But anyway, a couple of things that were critical for us, I think I should mention. One is the question of medical situation and the sanctions. Before the sanctions started, this overall sanction, squeezing the whole thing, life out of Venezuela. Venezuela was producing about 45% of its need domestically of medications, pharmaceuticals, and was importing 55% of it from abroad, Canada, United States, and other places. Now with US sanctions that are extraterritorial, I'm sure you know what it means, but I'll explain. It's not only that the US is refusing to trade, it is twisting the arms of other countries that if you deal with Venezuela, then you will lose your chance of dealing with the United States. And which country is willing to risk its economy dealing with Venezuela and losing 20% of 27% of the world market, right? In the United States. So one by one, if not, they are threatened. If they don't avoid, at least by their own economic interests, right? So it's extraterritorial in the sense that the Swiss, the Canadians, all other countries that were exporting medication to Venezuela are also stopped from doing it. So immediately the supply was shrunk to 45%. But at the same time, all the chemical substances that are used in production of medications are also sanctioned. So the import of raw material for production of medications was also sanctioned and banned. So that even shrunk the internal production to 14% of the national needs right now. So when you look at it that way, it's against Geneva Protocol, it's against UN Charter, and against international law. I mean, Geneva Convention says that in any war, and this war is an economic war, it's not just sanctions, it's economic war, you cannot target civilians, right? When you stop medications to reach people, you're declaring war on people, on civilians. This is illegal by all measures, but you're doing it. And now they pretend that they are into helping, sending humanitarian aid to Venezuela through that bridge with 2 buses or trucks or whatever, right? Such a hypocrisy and lies and deceit and crime against humanity. That's what I would call it. It's crime against humanity. That's what the United Nations calls such an act. If you intentionally target civilians, it's terrorism for political purpose. That's what it is, what terrorism is. When you attack civilians to achieve political ends, right? That's the definition, international definition of it. So how else can we define this? It's terrorism, state terrorism. That's one. The second aspect was the whole issue of elections, because I want to get into this introduction before I get to that issue. One thing, if we go back to the history of United States invasion after invasion, what we're talking on ending wars, endless wars, you see a fixed pattern in all of them. Repeat of the same model, modus operandi, right? First step, demonize the leader of the country. Okay, that means recruiting the media. Media becomes part of the war propaganda. They did it against Milosevic, they did it against Saddam Hussein, they did it against Gaddafi, they did it against Assad, right? They did it against Noriega in a different way, right? They're doing it against Putin. So when you're planning something against a country, the first thing is to demonize. And not only to demonize, but shrink the whole government into one person. As if there's no parliament, there's no executive branch, there's no judiciary, nothing. It's just one person. You have to present it as if he's a dictator, or she is, or whatever, right? Because sole person running the whole show. That's one, presenting him as a dictator. And going in there for humanitarian purposes to help the population, right? And then come sanctions, right? You start to weaken the economy and the country so that they cannot resist your attack afterwards. They did it similarly to every country. Not doing the same thing to Venezuela. Through sanctions, right? Presenting Maduro elected twice by a very high percentage of votes. Certified elections by international observers. as dictator. Well, I give you one thing. Maduro government, the Venezuelan government, when we were there, President Maduro himself announced, I don't know if it was public information or not, they have created a people's militia of 1.6 million and they have armed them. They are arming 1.6 million people in defense of the country in case the US attacks. Can you imagine a dictator arming its own people? Right? But they're doing it. Okay, there's no dictator there, but they're presenting it as it. There's no poverty or suffering in that sense. I give you the food issue. 85% of Venezuelan food was in the hands of the private sector that is speculating on everything right now. Right? They were hoarding, they were withholding, as you mentioned, in order to jack up the prices so they can make more money on the sale. They are refusing, and part of it is major part of the food is imported, right? But when you are importing your food on the international market, you're buying it with dollars, right? You have to convert your currency into dollars to buy it, to pay your seller, right? Now, when the US, through its banking system, forces the exchange rate of Venezuelan currency to such a low level that it's worth now 1/10 of what it was before, that means that every import is going to cost 10 times as much, right? They are forcing this inflation on that country, right? But what does Venezuelan government have they done? They have created these food support systems throughout the country. They call it clap boxes. Okay, that includes bi-weekly, bi-monthly distribution of basic food essentials and other supplies like soap, cleaning, detergents, and all those things in one big basket. And it is distributed on a bi-monthly basis to 6 million families in Venezuela. This is a temporary, of course, patchwork, because you cannot go on forever like that, first of all. And you have to, one way or another, come up with the money to pay for it, right? When all the funds and assets are frozen, when all the goals of the country have been kind of seized by the British Bank of England, not only frozen, seized, taken, billions of dollars worth of gold. When US froze all Venezuelan assets that the economists told us is about $120 billion worth of assets and trade have been lost so far. And if you look at the ripple effect and the shrinkage of the gross domestic product as a result of that, economists were estimating about $300 billion worth of damage so far to Venezuelan economy. Under those circumstances, distributing 12 billion pieces of baskets in a month, 12 million. Well, you're accumulating more and more in debt, right? One way or another. So you can do it for a short time or a medium range time, but you cannot do it forever. There must be some other solution, right? So that's why I'm saying that this question of Venezuela, they are trying to bring them to their knees. And that's why we need an urgent action to oppose this. The crime that's being committed against Venezuela. So, about the elections, the dictator, so-called, fully elected, 67% of the votes certified by international observers in the 2018 elections, right? You have to understand the structure. I mean, meeting with the president of Electoral Council was an eye-opener for all of us. First of all, we have to recognize Venezuela does not have 3 branches of independent branches of the government. It has 5. Electoral Council is a separate branch on the same footing as the other branches of the government, the executive, judiciary, and the legislature. And it's answerable to none of these powers in terms of regulating the elections, regulating the behavior of the parties, regulating the question of corruption in the parties, funding of the parties, illegal funding of the parties and stuff like that. All kinds of things. Looking at the complaints and protests and challenges, all of those things go through that independent branch, and they're not answerable to any of them. Nobody else can influence them. It's totally independent. And she told us that we went through, and Venezuela has done several things. First of all, I mean, before this Bolivarian revolution, there were only 8,000 polling places in the whole Venezuela, only in the rich neighborhoods. They have doubled that number. And that extra ones are all in the poor neighborhoods now. They have guaranteed something else, that there are no two polling stations that are separate from each other by more than 1 kilometer. So there is a polling station within 1 kilometer of everybody's residence, right? It is the government that is trying to register people to vote. It's not the public, right? There were, I think 20-something% of population were never registered by the time of the Bolivarian Revolution. They have shrunk it to 8%. They're government people, going door to door, everywhere, trying to find people who have not registered to vote and get them to vote. If you look at Venezuelan society, election is a sacred process for them. It is really. It is so protected in terms of all aspects of it. And they're talking about dictatorship, right? And now, who is against democracy? You just, and that's another trick also. You know, the presidency of the National Assembly or Parliament of Venezuela is rotating. It's not something somebody is elected and stays there for the term. The presidency rotates among representatives every few weeks, right? Opposition, a majority, minority. There are 32 parties in the parliament to begin with, in the system, right? And they rotate. And the thing is, when they announced Guaido as the president, interim president, because of a trick, I mean, they wanted to play on the constitution. Because in the constitution of Venezuela, there's a clause about incapacitation of president, right? If the president becomes incapacitated. And there are 4 listed reasons for incapacitation. 1, dies, right? 2, commits suicide. 3rd, resigns. 4th, removed by the Supreme Court, right? In those cases, they have provisions who replaces the president on an interim basis. Now, there's 2 cases. 1, if the president dies, a president dies before taking office after election, right? Then the president of National Assembly becomes interim president, which is not their claiming, right? That Guaido now is, according to constitution, the interim president, right? If the president is incapacitated after taking office, then it is vice president, not the speaker of the parliament. It's president of parliament takes office. Guaido was in office when they declared that they don't recognize him as president. And the reason for not recognizing him was not one of the 4 that is listed in the constitution. He didn't die. He didn't commit suicide. He didn't go crazy. Right? He didn't resign. He wasn't removed by the Supreme Court. So none of those apply. But anyway, they use it, right? Besides, Maduro was in office when you declared that you don't recognize him, right? So it should be vice president, not this guy. So the US waited until it was this guy's turn, who was trained here in the United States, educated here, under new liberal economists, especially trained for this purpose. And he's trying to privatize everything right now, if he gets power, right? We waited until it's his turn to declare Guaido illegitimate and recognize him as the interim president. But they forgot that the Constitution not only says that it's before inauguration that this applies, but also within 1 month, the interim president should call for a new election. They did neither, right? First of all, it wasn't the vice president, it was they appointed him. Secondly, he didn't call for an election, even if he was illegally appointed, right? And then after that, after those weeks, he wasn't the president of parliament anywhere, right? So nothing happened. And the reason they didn't call for an election, because they were just coming out of an election, 67% for Maduro. If they called another one, it would be a repeat of the same thing, right? Disproving their case. They have no case. And besides, it's against international law to call somebody else the president of another country, The guy, nobody knew him before he declared himself president. His party is the utmost right-wing, near-fascist party in Venezuela among the 5 opposition parties. It's the rightmost one, the smallest one, right? And it was this coalition that was challenging Maduro of conservative parties, right? With this one on its right side. Okay, now, he made a mistake also. He called on the United States to invade his own country to remove Maduro. Nobody in the right mind would do that, right? And that angered even the other opposition parties because they're willing to get rid of Maduro. But patriotism and feeling of independence goes back to Bolivar, Simon Bolivar. They are proud of their independence. They could never tolerate that. So this guy has even lost some of its credibility among the opposition. And I raised it as with some of the leaders of the Venezuelan government. Well, this guy is a kind of exhausted as a resource. No use value anymore. What if the United States decides that his dead body is worth more? Because then they can assassinate him and blame the Venezuelan government and go for a military action against them. And you know what the minister told me? It's ironic that it's our responsibility now to make sure there's no harm happening to him. And they are doing it. That's a situation in Venezuela. But it's critical. The struggle is going on. They are dedicated, committed to defend their country. They are arming their country. They are trying to find every possible way to overcome these sanctions, which are absolutely illegal. You cannot use economic power as a weapon, according to international law and charter. If there is a sanction, it has to be approved by the United Nations for justifiable reasons. If there's a crime against humanity happening or something like that, or genocide or something like that, yes. But just because you don't like a leader. What? There's more to it, because it's not just about Maduro, the same way it wasn't about Assad, the same way it wasn't about Gaddafi. There's a project for the new American century. I don't know how many of you have heard about it. That's a project to dominate the world after the dismantling of USSR. The neocons were the architects of this policy, and they came up with several principles on this. One, we should not allow another international global rival like former Soviet Union to reappear. That's one. That's why all the attack on China and so Russia is going on right now, because they don't want them to become another challenge. Second, regional powers. Any country that has the ability to resist our plans for domination should either be suppressed, invaded, or partitioned into small pieces that makes it unable to resist, right? You can see it. They're partitioning Iraq right now, right? Syria, the northern part is carved out, the western part by Israel, right? 11 US military bases and French military bases in north of Syria right now. And in our last visit, I asked President Assad about this. Yeah, ISIS could be defeated militarily, but you cannot pull your gun, draw your guns against the United States. What are you going to do there? And they said, we know that. It's a long process. You have to go through stages. And he said, you know for a fact that we cannot do it alone. We need international solidarity, support. And this is where everything comes in. You know, we need, you know, this force is acting globally in a united way within NATO, right? This is NATO forces, countries that recognize Guaido all together at once. Nobody else. Some other kind of smaller countries that are under, you know, under the thumb of NATO, and they were pushed to do the same. The only big one that switched side was Brazil, because of the election of this fascist president right now, that switched the whole relationship with. So this is the story, but we have to, another struggle about Venezuelan embassy is going on right now in Venezuela. 2 of our delegate members are inside the Venezuelan embassy right now. Peace forces are defending Venezuelan property there because United States government wants to give it to Guaido people. And our people are inside the Venezuelan embassy building with the permission of Venezuelan government to protect it and not allow this to happen. And now, you know, skirmishes are going on because hoodlums and a lot of mob-like people are gathering around the embassy and please follow that. It's a very important battle going on. And every day, anytime there may be stormed and arrested and everything else. So that fight, the fight for Venezuela is happening in our country too. It's not just inside Venezuela. So I thank you. I leave there. Sorry for being too long on this, but it's so much to talk about. Thank you very much. I think you should. I think you should. They're recording. It's actually being live streamed.
Okay, well, I just would like to hear your response to the fact that when they go after these so-called dictators, that they call them, usually they raise the charge in the case of Lula and of Maduro that they're corrupt in some way. They're ripping off the oil money, we heard, all these charges. I'd like you to respond to those corruption charges.
Well, I just want to add more names to the list. Former President Correa from Ecuador is also being charged. Cristina Kirchner from Argentina is also being charged. President Funes from El Salvador is also being charged and currently with political asylum in Nicaragua. So the strategy, you mentioned it, let's single out the leader of the country. Let's choose a single target and aim at that person, mobilize the media, and simplify the issue to the viewers, in this case to the American public, and that person is the sole cause of the problem. You mentioned Lula. Lula improved the standard of living of Brazil substantially. The investment in poor, undeveloped areas of the internal part of Brazil were remarkable, and also their participation in regional entities, UNASUR back then, um, ALBA, considering joining ALBA, were just two examples of how Brazil was also integrating itself to that network of countries, ready to challenge US dominance in the Americas.
Well, I think the answer was given, but my question is, this is a generic accusation, right? Where is the evidence? Where is the example? Is what a specific thing did Maduro do that was corruption? Did they provide any even at least concrete example? Or it's just a generic accusation to make them look bad? Well, where did those 22.6 million low-income housing that they produced and handed over to the public for free, where did that come from? If not from oil money. And you're cutting that off. They're using that. That was the Bolivarian Revolution. I mean, the slogan of it was to use the oil money for the people. That's what they did. The corrupt leaders, I don't know how many of you have read the book and videos of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. The corrupt ones are the ones who accept a bribe and work with the United States, not those who resist the bribes and threats. You can't be corrupt and at the same time fight the United States. No way.
Questions?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't pay attention to the news, so I need to apologize. I just don't understand how this is going on. What happened? All of a sudden, everything's bad in Venezuela and we're invading. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And then another question I have is, what can we do, and what is happening? Is the UN involved at all? Are they doing anything?
There is a common wisdom saying, follow the money. Microsoft cannot sell licenses. Monsanto cannot sell their seeds. ExxonMobil and other oil companies didn't want to keep investing and dealing with the Venezuelan government in the terms of the Venezuelan government, in terms of sharing the profits and investing in technology to develop the industry. Venezuela is developing a new currency and having new trading partners in India, Turkey, Iran, China, Russia, and of course, strong ties with Cuba. That upsets many US corporations, which then tell their politicians to turn on the guns and to wait for the ambush and prepare the ambush. I would leave it kind of in those simple terms, but I'm sure Baman has something to say also.
Well, the peace movement is doing a lot of things. There are different levels of action that we are taking. of course, the struggle over the Venezuelan embassy is an important one in terms of the opening the eyes of the people to the subject and to the issue. And so please refer people to the news about what is going on. There's a total media blackout on it. Probably they're waiting until they occupy the place and then they announce their victories through the media. But until then, they're not going to say that the people of the United States are resisting what the US government is doing. That's one. Secondly, there are petitions by peace organizations all over the place addressed to Congress, to White House, to other places. Yeah, flood them. What we are suggesting as the peace movement, US Peace Council, is please directly contact your representative and demand a couple of things. One, hands off Venezuela, get US out of the back of Venezuela. And secondly, cut the military budget that is funding all these operations. You know, the military budget that Trump is proposing, on the surface is 750 million, but in fact, this is 989 million. US Peace Council just put out a statement on that and an analysis of what is going on. And there's two things that is people do not recognize. One is the size of the budget, which is being misled. People are being misled that 750 billion, which is not true. They're not counting a lot of things, including our nuclear weapons that are budgeted under the Department of Energy, not Pentagon. So it doesn't show them. Secondly, the composition of the military budget is shifting from normal Pentagon operational expenses, running their offices, running their electricity and personnel and everything, move to the part that deals with wars. So the war budget is increasing, Pentagon budget is shrinking by about 160 billion. There's a shift. So the number not only is absolutely increasing, it's shifting toward war rather than running the Pentagon in peacetime. So that is another thing. And most of this money is what they call operational contingency operations abroad, overseas contingency operations. That's the category in one Pentagon budget that deals with war budget. And that is the maximum right now. And part of this money is now being used on Venezuela and other places. So we have to fight that too. We cannot just fight in abstract, say, stop this. We have to stop the source of funding for this. And that's an important point. We, on our Facebook, webpage, uspeacecouncil.org, you will see the petition demanding from Congress to cut the budget, not accept the 2020 budget that the Pentagon requested for Pentagon. But there's lots of things. But please, on Venezuela, directly contact your representative and push them, or go visit them even as a group. Put together a group of 4 or 5 people and meet with them and tell them that you are not going to tolerate any continuation of this policy. Oh, one thing that is happening and we are working with, we are waiting to see how we can work with, is about 57 originally countries of the world that are being targeted by the United States or have been targeted in the past, have come together, created a coalition within the United Nations of countries, the Coalition to Protect the United Nations Charter. That's what it is called. And they are putting together a kind of a unified platform for the United Nations to continue from within the United Nations to oppose these unilateral actions, aggressive actions by the United States and NATO. So we are waiting to see what their platform and actions they are trying to do or are proposing, so that we can tailor our work towards supporting their efforts everywhere in the country. That's one thing. But in terms of UN, we are working with missions to get their help. And also, we are trying, US Peace Council is trying to have a meeting with Tulsi Gabbard soon to discuss not only the war budget, but also how we can help promote this anti-war agenda in the electoral process that the whole media is absolutely silent on, and all candidates are silent on, except Tulsi Gabbard. And I think we should push for this to be part of the national debate for elections. Question of war and peace and military budget. And I think that should be brought to the attention of all the representatives and senators also.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to call on myself briefly. A couple of us have gone to see Catherine Clark and her aides here in Framingham, Kelsey Perkins and Wade Blackman. Some of you may know them, but they came out and we talked about Venezuela for quite a while. And I think they were unaware of everything you've heard tonight and unaware of any good that Maduro has done. A letter that she wrote to one of our delegates included this language. I'm deeply concerned about the deterioration of the rule of law, governance, and economic policy in Venezuela. The Maduro government has repressed, intimidated, and punished political opposition, and compounding economic crises continue to extract a major toll on the Venezuelan public. So she drank the tea. And, you know, I don't know. I kind of believe what I hear until somebody tells me otherwise. So it's been a process for myself too. But we have tried to straighten her out a little bit on that. Any calls she gets or letters from you people would be terrific. Also, Kennedy, I asked him publicly if he believed in military intervention in Venezuela, and he said absolutely not. I'm not too sure if he's against the sanctions because he's not his father's kid, you know, his father who got the Chavez oil inexpensively. But I will pass around these clipboards. One is a petition for Kennedy and one for Clark. If you would please sign it, I'll mail them tomorrow. I got a few signatures last night as well. And if you can keep up that contact, I'd appreciate it very much. Also, I'm going to pass around a little basket for donations if you could help with speaker fees and some of the expenses of running this little event tonight. I thank you very much. And I believe, David, you had your hand up for a question.
Yeah, the mainstream media, which has been lying all week and concealing what's been happening, talks about a political crisis in Venezuela. But can't we begin to look at a political crisis within the opposition in Venezuela, which just made a terrible blunder, and in the United States, which directed a terrible blunder, and now we have the president contradicting his national security advisor and his Pompeo, this secretary of not negotiating. Maybe this is our chance, and we have not only Tulsi Gabbard but Ilhan Omar on one side objecting to these interventions, and we have Dick Durbin quoted by Pompeo as endorsing the attempted coup, the miserably failed attempted coup. What is it, the third miserable failure the US has tried in Venezuela? Or are there more? There was 2002, then there was Guaido, that was a blunder. And now you've got another attempt with Guaido. Maybe they're on a roll that we can take advantage of and build the biggest coalition to stop what they're inevitably going to do. They're going to try to save face. And maybe we can build an anti-war effort to stop what is probably coming, which is more sanctions and more intervention and more trouble.
Guided by your interest and your reflection, today we had in downtown Boston a meeting for the Boston Venezuela Solidarity Committee, and based on a suggestion that was given to us on Thursday when you kindly presented at Encuentro Cinco, we want to ask you, all of you, at the maybe personal level, at the outlets that you have available to you, since you mentioned this may be the right time to ask, why is our government committing all these blunders on our behalf? Why? Why don't we say anything? You don't have to answer. We have attempted to answer why we believe that Venezuela is getting so much hostility from the US. But those are our perhaps biased arguments. But you have the right to just ask why. Church um, bulletins, letters to the editor, to the local newspaper, calls to the local radio station of your choice, talk radio shows, friends, family members. Pose the question that you brought. Why blunder after blunder to get rid of a president that the Venezuelans have elected? Let's see what we can do with that. Tell our representatives, Congresswoman Clark, and so on. My invitation would be: do not renounce to your right of asking your elected officials, why are we doing this mess, and why now? Another question? More questions?
I'm not sure whether this can be answered, but I'm a regular listener to Amy Goodman's show pretty much daily. And she keeps bringing on these liberal experts on Venezuela. And they are all unanimously agreed that Maduro is incompetent and he has made mistake after mistake after mistake. And he needs to be rescued, of course, but it's almost hopeless because he's so bad. Now, how do we deal with these so-called liberals?
Well, maybe the only question I would have would be, why do we need to make that decision? Why don't we let the Venezuelans take care of that? How would you feel if in your country, other governments, other politicians, other intellectuals, other liberals would tell that President Trump, for that matter, didn't in fact win the elections and his administration is illegitimate? How would you feel? Aren't we doing the same thing, judging Maduro government and now even talking with arrogance about substituting him for the welfare of the Venezuelan people? I think that's the question we need to ask the intellectuals. What crown, what powers do you have, intellectuals and liberals and progressives, to decide what other people, other societies need to have as their leaders, if you cannot even handle your own?
Ditto.
Yeah, I just counted about almost 30 people, and 12 people have signed our mailing list. This mailing list is for the coalition that has formed to put on this meeting. And if there are precipitous events that occur tomorrow or next week or a month from now, we want to be able to notify people immediately. We might call a demonstration. There might be another important meeting. So I want to circulate this again and encourage all of you. We've had 3 very successful meetings in the Boston area. There were about 30 people at each of the other 2 meetings and tonight here. So that's a pretty important network because all of us are in organizations that can get the word out quickly. So I encourage you, please take this seriously, okay?
May I say something about that? I don't know about Baman. I know he is very active and committed to tour the country. I don't have that possibility, but I want to make myself available. And the Boston Venezuela Solidarity Committee actually has 4 people who in the past 4 months have visited Venezuela and have returned and have powerful testimonies, slideshows, PowerPoint presentations, and the face-to-face possibility of asking questions and trying to answer questions together. So we want to make ourselves available to come again, to go to other towns. If you have connections elsewhere, and what we bring as testimony and as a forum to discuss Venezuela in this case is something you would like to do, we want to make ourselves available. Popular education doesn't happen via text messages or tweets. Popular education happens when we are able to see each other eye to eye and try to come up with answers together. So please don't hesitate and count on us for that purpose.
I just wanted to make one comment about that last question. I think America's used to being in charge and we're used to telling other people what to do, and we kind of expect them to. So if we have come to a clarification that we don't want to be an empire anymore, we're going to have to let our reps know. We have to change our entire foreign policy. I think it's too expensive. I think $700 billion on the military is ridiculous, and we can't fix our roads or our schools, and our healthcare is substandard. So that's my answer to that question. We're used to being in charge, and it should come to an end and let people actually have their own sovereignty and have their own say. So anybody else comments? I really want to thank you all for coming.
Please don't film me. So I heard you talk about infractions of international law, right? Geneva Convention. So this is not the first time the US has done it. It's been happening for at least 60, 80 years. Why hasn't there been any concerted effort to bring the US to court in international law?
I think we have not agreed to be a member of that court, for one thing.
In fact, of course, US does not recognize the jurisdiction of International Court of Law. But they were the ones who created it against the socialist camp. And when it was used against US generals, Henry Kissinger, a few others, US withdrew. And it was targeted at the many African leaders and also the socialist countries. That was the purpose when they pushed for, US pushed for it. And it kind of backfired in that sense. And since then, US doesn't recognize the jurisdiction. So even if you take them to the court, I mean, none of what the United States is doing today fits any law, so that you cannot legally pursue these people because they don't recognize law anyway, right? What can you do? It only through mass protest, people's mobilization, organizing, putting pressure on different governments to not to cooperate, not to be part of the crimes that are being committed. That's the only way we can do it. And we are living in a very dangerous times. And we don't have much time. It's not just the environment that's threatening us. We're going downhill in terms of self-destruction or World War III in a way. We are. So comes in a package, I think.
I wanted to thank you both. First of all, the breadth and depth of the information that you shared with us tonight was reassuring and encouraging and inspiring. Thank you. And I just wanted to rescue the reputation of Democracy Now! Fortunately, David and I haven't seen those particular evening sessions because a lot that I've learned about Venezuela was corroborated tonight through Amy Goodman's interviews. There's a Venezuelan academic out of Pomona University who's written a great deal, and he's very informative as well. So don't give up on Amy Goodman, because we've learnt a lot on the pro-Venezuelan independence side.
Thank you. I would like to add one thing here as a caution. First of all, I watched a Venezuelan scholar speaking from Central University of Caracas, I think, of Venezuela, that was on with the Deputy Foreign Minister. That's the one. Two errors in his presentations. I think one was that he claimed that neither side wants to negotiate. Venezuelan government and Maduro repeatedly have said that they are willing to negotiate. Some part of the opposition is willing to negotiate. US is keeping them from doing that. So it's not just both sides are not trying. Secondly, a precaution about that negotiation. If there are 9 people supporting you and one person with a machine gun supporting the other one, and you sit to negotiate, right? Is it a fair negotiation, or is it at the point of the gun? We have to look at the context also. Yes, negotiation, yes, but free of foreign intervention. You cannot have a foreign country coming in with a machine gun standing behind this guy and telling us not negotiate with him. There's not going to be balance of power here, right? That's the issue.
Just to say something about Amy Goodman, she was here about 4 weeks ago. I was at South Church in downtown Boston, Old South Church, and she was talking. And my son, who is over there, grew up with her show every morning, and I am still follow her program, and I think she does a fair job presenting not her views, but also allowing other people to come and to her show and talk. And I will have not a warning, but an invitation. We went to Venezuela and we came back. We did it not long ago. You did it a month ago. We can do it. I am not saying, please come and it's going to be a Disney trip. Seniors in my high school, the high school I work, are going to Disney. That's the graduation tour. Venezuela is not a Disney trip, but it will be an eye-opening experience and you will be transformed. So consider sponsoring, co-sponsoring, supporting more delegates, more people from our neighborhoods, from our high school and colleges and universities, from our congregations and clubs to go to Venezuela, so that we don't have 2 visitors speaking to you, but perhaps neighbors, kids that you grew up with in the neighborhood, in the congregation. Support them. The people-to-people exchange is, in my view, one of the best ways of getting the ins and outs of how politics works at home, in the neighborhood. So consider that. So Amy Goodman does an amazing job, yes, but we can also do our own job, our homework, going and coming back, and then having this conversation at home.
I want to thank the videographer. This will be available to review. If you have left your email on the sign-up sheet, he will send a link to you so you can watch the video for free, in case you didn't catch everything. So very much appreciation for all of you for coming, and very much for Bauman and Jose. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you.